Are you tired of drafting busts? Do you wake up every morning in fear of your fantasy football drafts because you're tired of taking the Allen Robinsons of the world? Well, good news, folks. We're about to break down in this episode how to avoid drafting those busts. Before we do, though, I want to make sure you follow us across the board at Razball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok, folks. We have audio, video dropping every day. It's actually obnoxious. There's a lot of me, a lot of random stuff sitting on the couch dropping knowledge on TikTok. We also have daily podcasts going. And best part, too, is we're going to have must-draft running backs, wide receivers, tight ends episodes coming over the next few days. So we're excited for everything going on Razball Fantasy YouTube. And we also have the audio. If you want to go check out the podcast, we also have a Razball Fantasy Football podcast that you can get at Apple Podcasts and or Spotify. So make sure you're checking all that as well. And make sure, of course, you're going to the flagship, Razball.com. That's right, folks. We have daily content, written articles, ADP tools. We have tools and resources you need to win your fantasy league all on Razball.com. So make sure you go check that out as well. And don't forget, we have baseball, hockey, and also basketball. So if you just want to see something else, another sport, but really, we know you want to listen to football. So we're going to start the podcast right now. There is excitement in the air, folks. It's draft season for fantasy football, and I have to bring in, once again, back in action, Sky Guasco. You can find him at Sky Guasco on Twitter. Sky, tell us about how you're feeling emotionally.
I'm feeling very strong emotionally. I'm also very excited, Bob. This is the first time in almost like 6 months at least that you and I have done back-to-back shows when we had done about 5 shows a week for 3 years consecutive. So it's good to see you for a second day, my man. I'm ready to go. Getting very excited. I was just letting you know that I just updated my wide receiver rankings. Kyle Pitts climbing the charts. Very, very excited for preseason football and the rest of this preseason.
Why do you keep saying Kyle Pitts is a wide receiver? Is there an inside joke I'm missing? What's going on here?
He is have you seen the kid play?
Yeah. Oh, trust me. I know.
He's an joke. Are you actually
all right?
Right now?
All right. So there's.
I'm being silly, Bob. I was being silly.
This is a serious show. There's people out there losing sleep over a bus, and you're trying to go for cheap laughs.
I was being silly.
Unreal. Well, before we start the show, I have a quick question of the day. Something we found out through our research. Is there an ideal ADP for wide receivers, Sky? Now, listen, we all know about that running back dead zone. You know, we talked about it yesterday. Make sure you go check out the running back edition on yesterday's show, of course. But, Sky, is there an ideal spot that you think you want to target wide receivers in your fantasy drafts?
You know what's interesting, Bob? I think an analysis maybe you and I have to get into next summer is try to find the wide receiver dead zone. Nobody talks about it. And through our research, which you're going to bring up in a second, we did find a couple pockets that have not been so favorable to wide receiver. For me, look, depends where you draft, of course, in the first round or two. But if I can secure one of those top dogs at wide receiver in the first round, I'm looking at a top dog wide receiver in the second round. If I don't get a running back up in the first or second, right? So I try to go one of each in the first 2 rounds if it makes sense instead of doubling up unless that makes sense. After that, you know, it's usually the 3-4 round. 5, 6, 7 is that running back dead zone. So you look at wide receivers, but is that actually the best move there? There's great tight ends still left, high-end quarterbacks, but do you want to go early tight end or quarterback? And then, of course, we know that wide receiver is the deepest position annually in fantasy football as well. So you're talking about, 10th to 15th round, you can still find wide receiver 2s. Some wide receiver 3s are going to be high-level assets on high-moving offenses as well.
So we did look at the numbers and we did break it out. So I just had some fun numbers for everybody before we even start the show, that there is some kind of an area of the draft where you get the most value. The correct answer actually is rounds 4 through 6, folks. On average last year, the players that were drafted, now remember, this is a standard, probably not a standard, but like 180 draft picks. So really most of the wide receivers being drafted are going before rounds 1 through 12 in this format. So for the data, I broke it up, but rounds 4 through 6 in a 12-team league really gave you the most value. On average last year, wide receivers that were drafted actually gave you a negative return as a whole, about 10 spots lower than they were picked. So that is interesting. Now, the receivers in rounds 4 through 6 actually beat that by almost double of what you normally see in rounds 1 through 3 and other rounds like 7 through 9. Now, the wide receiver dead zone is actually rounds 7 through 9. The return on those is minus 15 spots from ADP to points per game finished. So there is something there. I do think that the main reason why, in my opinion, is that running backs get pushed up so much in the first 2-3 rounds that you're getting top 10 receivers in the back of the third. You're getting top 15 guys in the top of the fourth. And once you start getting into the 6th, 7th round, now they're even again. So I think the receivers catch up to the running backs, and then everybody that's when you see the dead zone end, because now there's really good running backs again who have starting roles. So I think that's kind of my philosophy behind that. But that's it. Let's get into how to avoid drafting a bust, the wide receiver position. The first thing I'm going to talk about today is, of course, injured players. We talked about yesterday, so go check it out. But here's some of the guys that are notable injured players heading into this season. Chris Godwin, Robert Woods, Michael Gallup, DJ Chark, and Jamison Williams, all currently being drafted over according to Razzball ADP. And we talked about this in detail yesterday's show, but about 70% of players do not meet their positional ADP the year after a major injury. This goes for every position pretty much across the board. And for those main skill positions like wide receiver and running back, it's actually a little bit higher than 70%. But Sky, I want to put you on the spot really quick. Any of these injured guys that you're willing to take a shot on currently at ADP, or are you actually going to listen to the data and avoid all these injured players?
Yeah, I don't listen to data. So I'm going to go ahead and go with Chris Godwin. I will definitely be picking him up in like the 6th, 7th round, which is insane right now. He might miss a week or two, so I need to make sure that I'm prepared for that. Also, if I'm using an IR spot in my league, 1 or 2, then it makes it a little easier to digest a guy like him. Or let's say my other dude from last year, I was super duper high on him, happened for a little bit. Then he, of course, tore his ACL at the end of the season, but that's Michael Gallup as well. That's a long-term play, but you're getting him at the last pick because people are forgetting about him, and he can come back second half of the season. Chris Godwin, for me, is a difference maker. Tom Brady's back. Everybody's fine. Gronk is still out, so Chris Godwin should get more work. We'll talk about some more Buccaneers here on the show today. But Chris Godwin, for me, man, is going to get plenty of work. Brady loves him. Hyper-targeted inside the 20s and has, I think, upside in the red zone. I don't think people give him enough credit for. So for me, it's Chris Godwin. I just need to make sure that I'm able to absorb a week or 2, even 3 or 4, if he happens to start slow. But if you're drafting him as your wide receiver 3 somehow and you're doing well in flex and some backup guys, I'd be totally fine with that.
In redraft, I think I'm not going to do it. I think in Dynasty, though, if we're going to talk a little Dynasty talk, if you're someone who's not ready to win now and you see a team that has Godwin that's more win now, go get him. Maybe even offer him, offer a player that's kind of on par with him normally, but then taking the long-term upside of Godwin, of course, in that offense. The next one is quarterback ADP. We talked about this a little bit yesterday with running backs, but oh my God, is it insane for wide receivers. Okay, here, listen to this. Top 10 quarterbacks for the impact they have on wide receivers finish, right? So there were 17 wide receivers last year drafted that all had top 10 quarterbacks. The average ADP finish versus average ADP versus points per game finish in PPR was neutral, okay? That doesn't sound great. Oh, neutral? Bob, what are you doing? Okay, now when you go to 11 through 20, that goes to negative 13 spots. You go to 21 plus, it goes to 21, okay? Minus 21. I mean, holy cow. Like, the fact that this is such a big impact, I don't think a lot of people talk about it enough. That doesn't really matter. Okay, maybe it does. Maybe, oh my God, in the data last year, if you took a wide receiver with a top 10 quarterback, it was an insane difference. And some of the teams on the list right now, Cincinnati, Buffalo, Dallas, Tampa Bay, the Chargers, Philadelphia Eagles, the Denver Broncos, the Arizona Cardinals, Baltimore Ravens, Kansas City Chiefs. Those are your top 10 teams with top 10 quarterbacks in ADP. Now, I know everyone's going to say just because it's fantasy football, I get that. I understand that, totally understand that. And maybe someday I'll do analysis for, some top 10 ranking that, NFL does or whatever. But for fantasy football people, we needed to find a data point. We found it. But Sky, quickly, what's your initial thoughts about this one?
Well, there's one quarterback for sure that's not even on the list that we know could amplify somebody as well. That's going to be Aaron Rodgers. Technically not in the top 10, but there's other guys that could, end up boosting other wide receivers. So, but I mean, look at this. We don't have to go through everybody right now to save some time, but, Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, all the Buccaneers, all the Chargers, right? A.J. Brown, Cortland Sutton, Nuke if he gets back, or Hollywood Brown, Bateman, who we like, a bunch of different Chiefs options. And there's other guys out there too. Kirk Cousins is on the line right there. Aaron Rodgers, what Trey Lance might be able to do with Deebo Samuel, and of course Derek Carr as well with Devontae Adams. So many options at wide receiver. Mute.
No, Bob, seriously, what am I doing? Changes the situation. Now, what does this actually mean? Quarterback changes, scheme changes, changing teams. Like, when it comes down to it, it's not always a really good thing for the quarterback. For the wide receiver to have change. Now, I understand there's loopholes to this. Obviously, when you have a quarterback who comes in like a Matthew Stafford last year and he completely amplifies a player like Cooper Kupp, I understand that. But that is not the norm. When you have changes in system, when you have changes in quarterbacks. Now, I think the one thing I will say is when you put in a better quarterback into an established situation, I actually think it's a loophole. I think that it does make sense because I think it's good for fantasy because the wide receiver knows the scheme. He knows the routes. He knows the combination. He knows what he has to do. He can play fast, and you give him a better quarterback. So I do think it is a loophole. But for the most part, we did find that any type of change is actually impactful to their fantasy finish. So that is one thing I did want to point out right there as well. Jumping down to improved surrounding talent. Now, some of the teams that I'm on the list here have improved their surrounding talent. Arizona, the Raiders, the Dolphins, the Steelers, the Lions, the Saints, the Jets, the Jaguars, the Eagles, and the Patriots all have more talent now in the receiving core, and this is not normally a good thing for fantasy players. Now, I know everybody hates to talk about it, but the Cowboys receiving core was a disappointment last year across the board. CeeDee Lamb was a disappointment. Amari Cooper was a disappointment. Each of those guys were between 8 and 11 points. Their finish was 11 spots lower than their ADP positionally. So that is not good for fantasy. We don't want to be drafting guys at wide receiver 10 and they finish at wide receiver 20. Same thing goes with the Cincinnati Bengals, like Tyler Boyd, for example, one of the guys I liked last year. You know what? When they didn't throw an elite amount of times, immediately kind of faded to the background. So I think there's situations there where you have to evaluate, obviously how much volume. There's not every team in the NFL is the Tampa Bay Bucks who throws the ball 700 times that can support 3 players for fantasy. A lot of teams don't do that. So this is really important here. There is a couple of teams on the bottom ticker here, Sky. Maybe just pick one that you think really surprises you, improved talent that makes you worried for fantasy.
Well, the Saints, who basically have a completely new wide receiver core. Of course, Michael Thomas, we all remember it. He hasn't really played in about a year and a half, 2 years, right? And now you have Jarvis Landry, who nobody's talking about, but he's been incredibly consistent as a low-end wide receiver 2, right? And then who knows what we're going to get out of Chris Olave, but kid looks like a stud, and so if Jameis can get it together, man, I think the Saints are going to really impress, and nobody's considered the Saints a high-level passing offense since 2019.
Super awkward when I have to talk about him later. Thanks, Sky.
You're
All
welcome.
right, let's get into now what we like to do now is we have this data. We know what kind of separates these players. So we wanted to take a look at some of the studs, some guys who fit all the criteria. They have the same coach, same quarterback. They aren't going to be injured. They don't have elite talent around them, so they can dominate targets. And they also have a top 10 quarterback for fantasy. So talk about some of these players: Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Mike Evans, T. Higgins, Juju, and Rashad Bateman. So tell us which guy you wanted to talk about for the show.
Man, they say in a relationship, you can't have 10 out of 10. If you're 8 out of 10 goals, things you're looking for in a relationship, you got 8 out of them, you're doing really well. That's a high quality relationship, right? All the things you marked off, I'm like, yep, this player has that and that and that and that. And you had to throw in the old doesn't have an injury, and when you're talking Mike Evans, you're going to have an injury. There's going to be half a hammy every once in a while. He's got soft tissue issues, always has. However, he also always plays through them as well. Mike Evans, for me, is a runaway right now. I'm like trying not to put him in my top 5 wide receivers because volume-wise, he's not going to be there, right? His career high in receptions was 96 back in 2016. Since then, it was 71, 86, 67, 70, and 74 last year. But he's had over 100 targets in each season. We know that he's had over 1,000 yards as well. Double digits in half of his seasons. 4 out of 8 seasons, he's had double-digit touchdowns. 27 touchdowns, Bob, in the last 2 seasons combined. He's been top 9 wide receiver in PPR for the last couple of seasons. So for me, Mike Evans is a runaway. And then you look at the other things, right? Tom Brady, back in the show, everything's fine. They're going to throw 650, 700 plus times. Gronk is gone for now, at least. Godwin, even if he plays day one, is not 100%. AB is gone, right? Evans is the 1, 2, and 3 look probably, and especially in the red zone. I love Mike Evans. It's just about a volume thing because those other guys are probably going to get more overall catches for PPR leagues, but Mike Evans might have more yardage and probably will have more touchdowns.
I have Mike Evans in every team so far. So it's like,
dude, I'm with you.
Oh, man,
we were just talking about ADPs and where do you get a wide receiver early? Yeah. And I usually try to go running back first round, high quality wide receiver second round. Mike Evans is that guy every single time if I can find him. And sometimes he loops around to the early third. And in my opinion, that's a steal every time.
Oh, it's nuts. So nuts. Anyway, I wanted to talk about a player today. I haven't really put a lot of time, energy, and effort in. It's Rashad Bateman. Now, the thing with Rashad Bateman is he surprised me. This is one of the guys that when I was doing this opened my eyes. I kind of already knew about the Chargers players and the Bengals. And, I knew about the CeeDee Lamb without Amari Cooper and I knew about those guys, the Tampa Bay guys, anything you name, I got. Bateman was a complete surprise. So it actually led me down a path to actually look at his information because so with Bateman last season, Lamar got hurt. He did not play the first handful of weeks. We didn't get to see a lot of Bateman with Lamar Jackson. But what we did, when he did come in, he kind of made an impact right away. He actually, the first 4 weeks before Lamar's injury last year with Lamar Jackson, he averaged 7 targets a game, 60 receiving yards, and average double-digit fantasy points in PPR. Now, that's like wide receiver 4 numbers, obviously, but this is a rookie who barely played in the offseason because he was dealing with injuries. But now you see this opportunity. You see that vacuum open up. And over the last few years, when you take away an elite number 1, somebody emerges on the back end. First off, look at the Vikings with Stephon Diggs. When he goes to Buffalo, it became Justin Jefferson. With the Texans, when they traded away DeAndre Hopkins, remember Will Fuller? He was an absolute monster before he got busted for PEDs. When these elite guys get traded, there is a huge vacuum void. And Mark Andrews is Mark Andrews. He's already set. We know Mark Andrews is going to do his thing. But there is a huge opportunity for Bateman behind Andrews. And he's not being drafted as if he's even in the top 5 rounds. You can get Bateman usually in the 6th, maybe even 7th. And I love that value for Bateman, especially because he checks all these boxes. Let's jump down to our next category. We're going to talk a little bit about wide receiver sleepers. These are guys going a little bit later in drafts that check all these boxes. And the guys that are fit in this category are Josh Palmer, Sky Moore, MVS, Mecole Hardman, Russell Gage, Tyler Boyd, Julio Jones, and then Jalen Tolbert, the rookie from the Cowboys. So, Sky, any of these guys stand out for you?
I cannot believe we've come to the point where Julio Jones is in a sleeper category. Just being a perennial, I think he's an NFL Hall of Famer, certainly a fantasy football Hall of Famer. Julio Jones has been incredible. Now, look, let's throw out last year. I get it. He was terrible. He was hurt. The Titans experiment didn't work out. I get all that. Throw it away. Before that, he was top 5, top 2 for years and years and years and years and years. Julio is not Julio anymore. However, the difference between this year and the entire rest of his career, except for the first couple with Roddy White, Julio does not have to be the number 1. He will not be the number 1. That's Mike Evans. He won't be the number 2. That's Chris Godwin. He may not even be the number 3 early. That might be Russell Gage. So he's talking number 4. He's going to get a 4th string cornerback, somebody who's going to be a foot shorter than him. And Julio Jones is going to school these kids all over the place. Couple advanced stats for you just to let you know that Julio Jones does have a little bit left in the tank. And last year, I think, was a problem. But with Tom Brady, I think he should be just fine. Julio Jones is kind of a fun one I found here. 8th among wide receivers in juke rate, Bob. That is evaded tackles per reception. So when he had the ball, he was still able to make moves and make guys miss. And of course, we know he can take one to the house. He only had 2 drops on the season. He was number 4 among wide receivers in contested catch rate, which is contested catches divided by the attempts that he had. So basically, when he had a contested catch, he made that happen 65% of the time on 14 targets, which is fourth in the league. And then he was 28th in ADOT, which is average depth of target, only 11 and a half yards in that Titan offense because Tannehill's not really chucking it downfield too much. We know Brady is going to, right? So if you have Evans on one side, Julio on the other, and you have Gage and Godwin in the middle with Leonard Fournette running the ball, who are you going to go after? It's not going to be Julio Jones ever. It just won't be. He's going to get single coverage. He might even catch touchdowns in Tampa Bay because Tom Brady is going to throw for at least 40 of them. So for me, man, Julio Jones, I can't believe he's a sleeper, if you want to think of it that way, but he's going to be a late round pick for me. Why not? It's low risk, super high reward. And one more stat for you. Last year, he was 25th out of 90 wide receivers ranked by PFF in yards per route run. He was just ahead of Stephon Diggs and Deontay Johnson. Julio Jones was ahead of Stephon Diggs and Deontay Johnson in yards per route run last year. So he still got it in short bursts. He's not going to give you those, 14 catches for 200 yards anymore, but he could give you, 6 catches for 80 every week, and he might catch a touchdown each week as well in this offense. Julio could back himself into a high-end wide receiver 3 with, I think, wide receiver 2 upside every single week, and he's free.
Well, this is going to be awkward because I actually have Russell Gage.
I love it. Get them all. I already talked about Chris Godwin and Mike Evans.
Yeah, I think at this point, it's first of all, we have to take into context that there is not a lot of teams in the NFL that throw as much as the Bucs. Last year, they were by far the most pass-heavy offense. Tom Brady's not going to change. They're going to do it all over again. They're going to push 700 pass attempts. That does offer a unique opportunity for a third receiver to really emerge behind Godwin, behind Mike Evans. Now, I understand Russell Gage has a serious hamstring injury. I get it. He might not be 100% for week 1, but it's starting to tell in his draft costs. By beginning of August before his injury, he was creeping into that 8th, 7th round range because he was getting all the buzz. Godwin's banged up, not playing in 11 on 11s. Tom Brady's new favorite target's Russell Gage. Well, now he gets hurt. No one wants him. He's slipping back to the 12th round. Now you can get him right around wide receiver 43 at the 117 right now is where he's going. And I think you could probably get him at that turn pick pretty consistently. Now, this is kind of my point. And I'm going to back it up with some numbers. The big 3, Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin, and Mike Evans played 16 games together from 2020 and 21. In those 16 games, the wide receiver 3, not number 1, number 2, the wide receiver 3 in points per game was 14.3 PPR points per game. That would have been wide receiver 25. That's the wide receiver 3, folks. So this offense can support. By the way, that's with Gronk, taking targets. Who the hell's taking targets at the tight end position? I don't think anybody. So I think that you could take both these guys and just say, all right, maybe one of them emerges, but it's such low risk and this offense throws so much, it's worth it. Absolutely. Let's jump down to some red flags because we can't always be positive, Sky. I mean, sometimes we got to talk a little bit about, so I looked at the numbers, I looked at the situations surrounding talents too much. They got, different schemes. They got all these changes. And here are the guys that we think are slight red flags. Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Deontay Johnson, and Michael Thomas. So give us the player you want to talk about in this section.
I'm really bummed that any of these guys are on this list, Bob, because I love every one of these players as individuals, of course. I'm going to kind of cop out here a little bit and just go Dolphins. So Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, one or the other. And this just straight up comes down to numbers, volume, and watching the 49ers every single Sunday, right? The offensive coordinator for the 49ers is now the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. They're going to run the Shanahan offense. What do we always say about the Shanahan offense? Very efficient. Yes, absolutely. Yards after catch. Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill can both take a 3-yard slant for 96 yards and score a touchdown any play. I know that, and Tua's definitely banking on that. But volume at the top of the food chain for fantasy football is key. And can Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill be a top 6 wide receiver if they get the touchdowns and the yardage? Sure. Are both of them? No. Do we have any inkling who the one might actually be? I don't. Everyone's stoked on Tyreek Hill. I get it. He's the one talking all preseason. Tua's better than Mahomes, all this bullshit. He's obviously lying. But Jalen Waddle set all rookie records last year, right? Alabama connection and all that. Like, why wouldn't Jalen Waddle be the guy? They already have the rapport and continuity that Bob and I talk about all the time. So for me, I love both the players. I love both the situations. I think they could both be great middle wide receiver twos all season long with big upside on a given week. But I'm nervous about drafting both of them because I just can't come up with who's probably the number one. And they're not both going to be T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. In my opinion, there's no chance that happens with this team and the Dolphins and Tua. So for me, man, I'm kind of just drafting around both of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle.
All right. Listen, ironic. I already talked about the Dolphins wide receivers. I agree with you there. My guy's Michael Thomas. Okay, let's take a little flashback to Michael Thomas, number one wide receiver, Michael Thomas.
By a lot.
It's 2019. We don't even know what COVID is. We're on this time travel back in time, folks. And Michael Thomas has got Sean Payton, Drew Brees, and zero target competition, all right? In 2019, outside of Alvin Kamara, who, by the way, is still on the team, his number two target on the team was Jared Cook with 65 targets. Why is all this important? Well, Sean Payton's gone. Yes, Pete Carmichael's still there, but Sean Payton, the visionary, is gone. The second problem is they went from Drew Brees to Jameis Winston. And Jameis is fine, but Jameis Winston's coming off a serious injury, okay? Jameis Winston isn't just a healthy quarterback. He's got an injured quarterback that he has to go. That's a downgrade from his previous quarterback. The other problem is that not only does he have a brand new shiny rookie named Chris Olave, but they brought in Jarvis Landry. By the way, Jarvis Landry in 5 of his 8 seasons demanded 130 targets per season. I got some bad news for you, folks. The Saints were not pass happy. The last time that he was the number one wide receiver, they threw the ball 581 times in 16 games. Do you want to take a wild guess how many times they threw the ball in 2021? In 17 games? 504. That's terrible. 75. That's 75 less targets in one more game. So lower pass volume, more competition for targets, injured quarterback, worse quarterback, a slight change in play caller. Listen, I just don't see it. I know he's going a lot lower than you would expect, but no thank you. I will pass. All right, let's talk a little bit about some you want to say something about Michael Thomas?
I just wanted to give you a pop quiz really quick. You asked me about the targets and answered your own question. I want to throw one back at you real quick. What is the area code of New Orleans, Louisiana?
Still don't know.
504. Coincidence? 504 targets? 504 area? Look it up, folks. Go ahead.
All right. So now everybody, we have to sometimes take a look at this and say there's honorable mentions. Teams, not everybody fits every criteria, but they fit most of them. Now, a lot of the teams that came up in our discussion, some guys that we wanted to bring up that pretty much have continuity across the board, same coach, same quarterback, slight changes here. The first one that came to mind was the Buffalo Bills. Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, Isaiah McKenzie, Jamison Crowder. The other one was Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell, Alex Pierce, and the Indianapolis Colts. Matt Ryan is not a top 10 quarterback, but he is an improvement on what they had last year. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's the thing. The other one is also some guys that are fringe QB, top 10 QBs that are elite NFL quarterbacks. You know, the Green Bay Packers and the Rams, Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson, and then the Packers, of course, with Allen Lazard, Christian Watson, and Romeo Doubs. Yes, those guys are like 11 and 13 in ADP, but as pure NFL guys, we'd probably say they're top 10 quarterbacks. So of the honorable mentions, Sky, tell us which one you want to talk about.
Yeah, Packers, and I don't know if I'm making a case for them or against them. Here's just some thoughts to kind of cop out either way. So we know Aaron Rodgers, back-to-back MVP, Hall of Famer, yada, yada. Devontae Adams with the Raiders, those are the old stories. Your boy Allen Lazard should be far and away the number one. Should be far and away the number one in this offense. Aaron Rodgers has done nothing but talk this kid up for 4 years. He never talks up anybody, and he's been talking up Allen Lazard through troubles over the years. So I really, really like Allen Lazard, especially his ADP in like the 7th, 8th round right now, Bob. We talk about it constantly. If he's sitting there, draft him. It's insane. He could finish as a top 12 receiver, and he's getting picked in the 8th round. It's embarrassing. But let's talk about Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. All the hype is with Christian Watson preseason, right? Top pick, big talent, coming in hot, whatever. Gets an injury. Now all of a sudden Romeo Doubs is the talk of Green Bay, and everyone forgets about Christian Watson. They're going to come back and have different roles, right? Romeo Doubs more of a Randall Cobb, if you will. Christian Watson's going to be on the outside, but all three of these guys could be high-level wide receiver threes weekly, and I expect Allen Lazard to be high-level RB or wide receiver 2 weekly. But don't forget about them, is all I'm saying. And they're all very, very, very cheap. Like Gabriel Davis, hype out of control right now. Isaiah McKenzie getting some hype. Jamison Crowder, nobody cares about anymore. Michael Thomas should crush the Colts, right? Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson are getting the hype. Everybody else is kind of up there already. So just don't forget about the Packers. The one downside that I'm a little bit nervous about is this idea that they might just run, which I think they could do. For the last 3 seasons combined, Bob, they have averaged the 11th most passing attempts in the league. Last year, with Devontae Adams dominating, they had the 18th most, so less than middle of the pack. I think that's going to go down even more. And if they're in like the middle 20s, throwing the ball 30 times a game instead of 40 times a game, that could really change things for Aaron Rodgers and these wide receivers. But they're all so draft value right now. I'm willing to take stabs on all of them, and especially the younger guys in Dynasty.
It haunts my dreams that I have 0 shares of Allen Lazard right now. I wrote an article about him.
He's your Tyler Boyd this year. He's your Tyler Boyd this year.
No, he's my Cooper Kupp. Okay.
Wow.
No.
I was trying to save that one.
Well, Tyler Boyd didn't do good last year. And Allen Lazard's gonna be great. Here's probably my Cooper Kupp guy this year. It's Michael Pittman. So when you're really looking at all the information, now this is an offense that he's been in for multiple years. He is healthy. The surrounding talent is kind of a question mark. You could say what you want about Mo Cox, Paris Campbell, Alex Pierce, but to be honest with you, he is definitely the number one. And he's going to demand targets in this offense. So there's no surrounding talent issue. His quarterback is not close to top 10 in ADP, but you could honestly make an argument that Matt Ryan is not only just a little upgrade, it's a big-time upgrade based on who Carson Wentz has turned into in his career. And I want to say this is the reason why. The Colts last year, Michael Pittman, really on a points per game basis, was not that good last year. He honestly fell right. He was probably a wide receiver 3 in PPR points per game. But you have to factor in the fact that they only threw the ball 521 times in 17 games. That is an outlier. And honestly, as much as I liked Wentz, he threw the ball pretty well. He was good at throwing to Pittman. Pittman had a solid year. He had 27 touchdowns, like fucking 4 interceptions or whatever it was. But my point is, they were so conservative on offense throwing the ball because they were worried about Carson Wentz making turnovers and making bad plays. That will not happen with Matt Ryan, and I have proof. First off, the previous 4 years, 3 years, 2018, 19, and 20, they averaged 17 game pace for pass attempts for the Colts was 605. Okay, so their average 17 game pace for those previous 3 years is almost like 80 more attempts. So what happens if you give them 80 more attempts? They get closer to the 600 range, which is their average previously in the 3 seasons. Michael Pittman's stats jump off the page. He goes from 129 to 150 targets, 102 receptions based on what he produced last year. His points per game spikes to 16.4. That would have been wide receiver 11 last year, tied with Mike Evans. Now he's currently going wide receiver 13, so everyone's in on him. And it's driving me crazy because I want more Pittman, but I can't get my hands on him because I'm always drafting either early in the 3rd. But Michael Pittman, in my opinion, is going to take the next step. A rock-solid 3rd-round pick in fantasy drafts. All right, folks, that's all we got for today. I hope the one thing you take away from this podcast, you better say to yourself, I know how to avoid drafting a bust at the wide receiver position. Once again, make sure you follow us across the board at Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. And, of course, make sure you go over to Razzball.com because we got all the hip, cool people writing articles on the baseball, basketball, hockey, and, of course, football. And also make sure you check out all the great tools like the Razzball ADP price tool. We also have a team name generator. Whatever you need for your fantasy league, we got. Once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. You can follow me at Bobby LaMarco on Twitter. For my co-host today, at Sky Guasco, you can follow him on Twitter as well. Folks, we are out of here.